千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now. To be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process of the Tao. I like the fact that last time we were able to finish our discussion of 62, and therefore today we can begin talking about 63. And chapter 63 has a Chinese title as well, which I will get to in just a minute. My remark on 63 before we start is that I want to share with everybody about this chapter, especially because this is the one with the biggest impact on my own life. So for me personally, I think it is very practical. I apply its central message, its lesson, to every aspect of my life, and it never fails to get me great results. As we get into it, I think you will see why I say that, and I think you will agree. So here we are with the Chinese title, chapter 63, Without Difficulty. So let me talk about these characters just for a quick moment. As usual, the Chinese titles are in 3 Mandarin characters, as you can see here. And this is also being read from left to right. The last character is always the character for chapter. And you'll see that every single time we talk about these Chinese titles. So the actual name is just the first 2 characters. And for many people with a background in Chinese culture, they know that given names in Chinese are either 1 or 2 characters. And the majority of the people have 2 characters to their given name. So the equivalents to our first name. In this particular case, the very first character, wu, just means to not have, to be without. It is the opposite of having something, the state of having nothing or not having anything. And then the second character, the one in the middle, is difficult or hard. Something that is difficult or hard. So when you put the 2 together, it's literally without difficulty. This speaks to the central idea in the Tao that when you are living in accordance with the Tao, when you are living the best life possible, you are actually not living the difficult life. It would be the very opposite. Everything can be smooth and easy. Now, this is a surface level idea, and there's more beneath the surface. There are people who study the Tao at only the surface level, and then they get this part, that, hey, life can be smooth and easy if I follow the Tao. Now, where people can go wrong is the misinterpretation of exactly how things can be easy. So here's what I mean by that. Some would assume that you make things easy by not doing anything, wu wei. So that's actually not the message at all. Those who come from the Chinese culture are known for being industrious, diligent, hard workers. They certainly don't feel like there's nothing for them to do. So wu wei would not match the everyday behavior that they exhibit. And if you know people from that background, you've already seen that firsthand. Now, one way to understand wu wei, which this chapter is going to be getting into, is to look at the graceful, seemingly effortless movements of Tai Chi. You probably have seen that maybe on TV, maybe in a park, when people are practicing that. The movements are circular. The movements are aesthetically appealing, but the grace and beauty and power from Tai Chi comes from diligent practice day after day over years. That's part of the secret that is actually no secret at all. The Tao makes life easy, absolutely, like the graceful, effortless movements of Tai Chi. And that ease, that grace comes from diligent cultivation of the Tao day after day, over years. It's the same thing. And this chapter will go deeper into that to really explain how the authentic teaching actually works beyond the rudimentary level that many people in the West are still kind of just learning and just trying to grasp. So let's take a look at the chapter itself. 63. 道德经 63. Act without action. Manage without meddling. Taste without tasting. Great, small, many, few. Respond to hatred with virtue. Plan difficult tasks through the simplest tasks. Achieve large tasks through the smallest tasks. The difficult tasks of the world must be handled through the simple tasks. The large tasks of the world must be handled through the small tasks. Therefore, sages never attempt great deeds all through life. Thus, they can achieve greatness. One who makes promises lightly must deserve little trust. One who sees many easy tasks must encounter much difficulty. Therefore, sages regard things as difficult, so they never encounter difficulties all through life. So if you look at the last two lines, there's the interplay between difficult and easy. That is the same interplay of yin and yang between the diligent practice of Tai Chi, and then when you master the movements, how effortless and easy and graceful it seems. Same idea, we're going to see that repeated throughout this chapter. And let me also say a few words about the first three lines. You can see that the first three lines, they all have 3 characters each. Therefore, my attempt in translating them was also keeping it brief, trying to stick to 3 English words each. So in order to convey the feeling of the original, and the feeling of the original was that there's a whole bunch of repeated characters that mean different things in different contexts. So we'll talk about all of that. So Wei Wu Wei, the last 2 characters of line 1, those are actually the characters for the Wu Wei concept. So it is especially important that we dig into it to explain exactly what it means. And it's a little bit different than the misconception that we often see in the West. For now, though, let's identify the repeating characters from line to line so that we can see the poetic structure. Right off the bat, with the first 3 lines, we can see that the middle characters is all the same from line to line. So I'll mark them in red. As you can see, those characters are the same. Then within each line, the first and last characters are the same. So that's part of the challenge in translating and interpreting correctly. Now, we can put a line between line 3 and line 4, but as you have seen in quite a few examples previously, quite a few chapters previously, we always want to read and understand the context in order to figure out where the division actually is. So if you take a look, you can, without paying too much attention to the Chinese side for now, looking at just the English side, you can see that there is a whole section here about the difficult and the easy, the large and the small. Then there's a whole section down here about what sages do. So then up here, starting from line 1, where does section 1 end? Well, in the context of the meaning of the line-by-line progression, it actually changes between line 5 and 6. The reason why is because line 4 and 5 are talking about big, small, many, few, the things that we handle in life. And then our behavior in life respond to hatred with virtue. So this is a different train of thought than the one that follows, which is all about difficult versus simple, large versus small. So for that reason, we can't just end the section on 3. It actually goes a little bit further because line 4 and 5 are about what we do in life. And it turns out 1, 2, and 3 are also all about living the Tao of life. Therefore, here's section 1, from lines 1 to 5, all about living life. So what about below that? Well, again, we see the repeating characters, and it's relatively easy to see that when you take a look at 6 and 7, there are 2 characters that repeat themselves. Let me highlight them for you. That makes it obvious. So the 3rd and 4th characters in each line are the same between 6 and 7. Does that mean that these 2 lines form a section together? Well, not quite, because these 2 lines are talking about difficult versus simple, large versus small, and that same train of thought carries through in line 8, 9, 10, and 11 before getting into what the sages do. So there's more repetition that we can see. So in 8, 9, 10, 11, we can identify some repeating elements to be able to see and discern a repeating pattern. So first, I'm going to use a different color to make it a little easier to see. So 8 and 10, they share 3 characters in common, as you can see. 天下, that's just below heaven, below the sky, everything below the sky. So it's just another way to say the world, all below heaven, everything below heaven. Then the last character there is the same. And these are the things we manage, the tasks that we work on, the affairs that we coordinate, etc. Now, what about the other pair, 9 and 11? You can see that they share 3 characters as well in slightly different positions. So the first 3 characters are the same. So that's pretty compelling and forms a section from 6 to 11. It's all about how we manage the various things we have to do. The big things, small things, the complex, difficult things, or the easy stuff. All in section 2. Then section 3, not a whole lot of repeating characters. Oftentimes that's the case in a concluding section of a Tao Te Ching chapter. And we see a few patterns, like in line 12, we see the last character is the same as the last character in line 13, but the lines are different lengths, so they're not in the same position. In both, the last character just means big or great or vast or grand. So then there are repeating elements within a line. So in 15, the first character is repeated again in the 4th position. that is the character for many. And you'll see that it's translated as many and then much. And that's because in English, we have different ways to describe numerous in terms of quantity. So then lastly, in line 16, there's a repetition here. In 16, the first 4 characters are the same as the first characters in line 12. So overall, the third section can be seen as a concluding summary section, and it ends by talking about how sages are, what they do. Or in the case of line 12, what they don't do. So all of this will become clear as we explore the meaning of the lines one by one. Let's get into the first 3 lines first. These are important. So in various chapters of the Tao Te Ching, the important lines are oftentimes in different positions. Sometimes they're in the beginning, like in this case. Sometimes they're in the middle, and sometimes toward the end. So let's take a look at the first one. Wei, wu, wei. Here's the Pinion, and these are relatively easy for non-native speakers to pronounce. So what do they mean? Well, the first character and the last character are the same, and therefore they're translated in similar ways, but contextually, they're actually quite different. The first character is to do something, to take an action. And the middle character means to be without, to not have. And therefore, when you put it together, people oftentimes will say things like do without doing or do nothing. So this is actually a slight misconception that we're going to address today. So here's the actual meaning. To say that you act without action, what it actually means is to act without excessive, unnecessary actions. When you are overzealous, that's when you do too much. That's when you go overboard. Oftentimes, emotions are involved. You want something so badly that you overdo it, and you end up tripping over yourself. That would be the opposite of a Tao-centric Wu Wei type of action. Wu Wei actions are mindful, they are considerate, they are precise, and therefore they are just what is needed. There's no overdoing or going overboard when it comes to the Tao-centric type of Wu Wei. And that's why sometimes when I describe Wu Wei, I say that it's doing just enough. It's basically not doing more than is necessary. Then another context of Wu Wei, to be without agenda. That is, to act without a self-serving, personal, selfish kind of agenda. So oftentimes we see people acting with that selfish agenda. They're aiming with a particular goal in mind when they start. This, what I do here, this has to benefit me in some way. It has to bring me profits. It has to make me better liked by others, more well-known, perhaps. All of those are Wei. So oftentimes, when you speak Chinese, when you learn Mandarin, you will learn that the way to ask why is 为什么. And then the first character there is actually the same as the character we're talking about here. Then the 2 other characters mean what. So literally, when you ask why in Chinese, you're saying for what. And therefore, this character can be the for. If you're doing something for a personal agenda, that's exactly what that means. And then when you do it without personal agenda, you get closer to the realm of Wu Wei. So that's all about egocentric motives. Now, sometimes, no matter what you do, it's excessive. That's because the best thing to do in some cases, not always, but in some cases, the best thing to do is just to step back and to just observe and let things unfold on their own. So then minimal action in that case becomes non-action. And in that particular case, it would fit the narrative that where people with misconception about Wu Wei, when they say do nothing, in that case, it fits their narrative. But again, not always. So Wu Wei sometimes is action-oriented, but it's because action in that case will be the most appropriate, will be the most congruent with the Tao. So it's a little tricky. Does Wu Wei mean non-action, doing nothing? It can mean that sometimes, but not always. More often than not, a little bit of a nudge is necessary to get things moving in the right direction. A few words of encouragement may be necessary to lift someone's spirit. In all of those cases, Wu Wei isn't do nothing, but maybe doing something that is not very involving, maybe not something that is very taxing on your resources. So that's what it means. Let's explore a little bit further. Okay, so most often it means to do just enough, and all I mean by that is not going overboard, not be overzealous, not trying to do everything under the sun and then failing at it miserably. We've all had that experience. So when you look at the Tai Chi example that I talked about, when people go through the motions, you see that there's nothing wasted. Each motion has a particular purpose and is exactly what is necessary for a particular situation. No wasted, unnecessary motions at all. That's what makes it beautiful and graceful. Okay, so I want to talk about what happens when you master Tao in this context, in this sense. What you do, the Wu Wei actions that you take, your actions come from observations and insights. When you look at a situation, you can identify the place where you need to act, the button, so to speak, that you need to push, a particular lever in that situation, not a physical lever, but something that you need to pull at to get results. So based on those actions are based on observations and insights that you gain with observations that are not just on the surface level, but deep below that. And that's what insights reside. Insight is literally the insider view. Next, your actions may be seamless or even imperceptible. So this is associated with stories that I have told before, where a master of the Tao can do things in a way that's not obvious at all. If the sage was to lead by totally mastering the Tao, the people who are being led may not realize that the sage is actually leading them. To the people, it's imperceptible. They feel like they're the ones who are taking the initiative to get something done. When in reality, it's masterful, the ultimate realm of leadership to motivate people to do what they ought to do, and then step back and let them feel like they should take all the credit, because they should. Third, your actions may be minimal yet effective. You might not have done a whole lot, but if you're skillful, that's exactly what is needed, and therefore it can be very effective. Lastly, this is a major point. So the the previous 3 sub-bullets that you see there describe the kind of actions that you may be taking mindfully. Then the last bullet there at a higher level, it just means that having acted, whether it was seamless, imperceptible, or based on action, based on observations, having acted, you simply let it be. You don't keep going back to meddle with the situation. You are satisfied to have done exactly what was called for, what was necessary. And so you can probably begin to tell this is only line 1, and yet we've gone pretty deep into levels of meaning below the surface. So that's what this chapter is like. And when you master these ideas, I think you will find that it's very effective in your life. Now we're ready to progress on to the second line. Second line, 是无事. This is translated as manage without meddling. So if we were to translate them as in the same way, it might be manage without managing, but the context of the second iteration, the last character 是, it is actually that extra effort that you saw before in the previous line. In the previous line, we also had the same character repeated twice, but then the meaning of the second instance, the last character, is it has that extra push. It has that overzealous elements associated with it. It is the same for this line. So let me bring up the Pinion, 是无事. And this is a similar context as 为无为. This can also be misconstrued as manage without managing. That's actually not what it means at all. So as I mentioned, the second 是 has a different contextual meaning. It points to the overzealous management, which goes beyond management into the realm of interference or meddling. So now you can see the match between this line and the previous line. The second character, the second of the 2 repeated characters has a different meaning than the first one. So meddling, what I mean by that is micromanagement, constant interference, nagging interference, backseat driving, trying to do everything yourself because you have an issue with control. This is what we talk about, hey, this person is a control freak, has to be in absolute control of everything, becomes a bit of a perfectionist. And how do we know that this is the way that it was meant by the original sages? Well, we can tell this is the case just by understanding the rest of the chapters. And commentaries throughout history also confirm this understanding. So if the Tao of management is not interference or meddling, then what is it? Well, it's actually quite simple. It's what you would expect. It's simple, but not necessarily easy for most people to follow. The Tao of management is about planning things out in advance, leaving room for contingencies and improvisation. The Tao of management is also delegating, which is about trust. You trust people to be able to do a good job without you having to do everything yourself. So delegation is an element of that. And third, the Tao of management is also about following up to let nothing fall through the cracks. The Tao is about the details as well as the big picture. So I think we are now ready to talk about the last one of the 3, the collection of 3. 为无为. So when you look at the Pinion, you will probably see that, hey, wait a minute, that's exactly the same as what we had for the first line. So they seem like they would sound the same. And to non-native speakers, they probably do sound the same, but in Mandarin, they sound different, and the characters look different, as you can see. They sound different because of different pitch, different tone. And when I say them in succession, you may be able to tell, but this is typically difficult for English speakers to discern. The way in the first line is the second pitch, way, and then way in the third one, that's the fourth pitch. So that's the difference. Now, just like line 1 and line 2 can oftentimes be misconstrued, people will misinterpret them in a different way from the original intended meaning. It is the same for line 3. It can also be misinterpreted. Specifically, line 3 can be misunderstood as being about the flavor of food because it says taste without tasting. Wouldn't that be about some kind of food or drink so that you can taste the flavor? Well, actually, if you think about lines 1 and 2, it's all about what we do in life. In life, taking actions in various ways. Sometimes we take actions unskillfully, we don't get very good results. Then we see the sages taking skillful actions, which come back with phenomenal or excellent results. Same with line 2, it's also about life, to manage the various things, various elements of life, whether in the personal sphere or at the workplace. So that's also about life. With those two examples, when you push that logic to the next one, to line 3, it can then dawn on you that, well, it's actually not about food at all. It's also a more general statement about life. And that is the case. It's about the flavor of life, not the flavor of food. And what do I mean by the flavor of life? Well, when we talk about the zest for living, when we talk about enjoying life, all that life has to offer, the delights, the favorite things in life, that's the kind of flavor I mean. Are you really getting the flavor in life? Meaning, are you really getting the enjoyment out of life? So let's explore a little bit further this taste without tasting. So as I described in the last slide, the first way means to get the flavor of a situation or life, get a taste of it, get a taste of what a situation is currently, how it has evolved, and where it can possibly go. So metaphoric description of knowing what's happening, to get the flavor, whether it's about circumstances, about your own life, it's all metaphorical descriptions. Now, what about the last character? Similar to the previous two lines, has a deeper meaning, not just getting a taste, but to lose oneself in the material world. Like, for instance, chasing after thrills, becoming so immersed in life that you lose your objective ability to observe. So these are, when we take a step back, we see that these three lines are actually forming a complete thing. So this line is about excessive involvement with life, where one cannot be objective. So then what can happen is that you're getting thrills, chasing after thrills like entertainment, like material pursuits, they come and go, they don't last. So how do we know this is the correct interpretation? How can we be sure? Well, I'm going to lay them out side by side so that it will become obvious. Before we actually get there, I want to talk about references in this chapter that point to previous chapters, so you can see that these ideas are recurring in the Tao Te Ching. First, line 1, it echoes concepts expressed previously when we looked at Tao Te Ching chapter 48. And here I have a snippet of chapter 48 so that you don't need to go back and look it up. You can just take a look at this. These 3 lines from 48, they say, pursue Tao, daily loss and more loss until one reaches unattached action. So here at the end of line 4, Wu Wei makes an appearance as unattached action. With the context that it provides, this is how we know that Wu Wei is talking about attachments in general and how one can act without it. If you look at line 2 and 3, when you pursue the Tao, there's a daily loss and more loss. What that means is that the extra effort, the extra energy that you devote into overdoing something, going overboard, trying to do too much, that those types of excessive emotion is what you reduce and let go of because you don't actually need it, and it's actually detrimental. It's actually not leading to a great result. And if you insist on piling on top of that one after another, you only make things worse for yourself. So to lose something is to lose the excess in this case. And it is also to lose your attachments to a particular outcome. So a sports team in a game, in a sporting contest, may be very attached to winning. Want to win, want to get that final score higher than the other team. That very attachment can cause the team to perform suboptimally. That is, they are so hung up on needing to win, too eager, too much in a rush, so that they're not taking their time to do things right. So then the end result is opposite to what they want. They actually don't perform in accordance with their own best level of ability. Now, when we talk about Wu Wei, in the case of the sporting contest, in a ball game perhaps, the team that understands it would not be worried about the final score. Instead, they would simply be worried about what is happening right now, and worry is not a really good word. They would be mindful of what's going on right now. What is the movement of the ball passing from one player to another? What is the position of the players on my team as well as the other team? How are people moving? Where are they now? Where are they going to be? Taking all of those into account, being mindful of the present, that's Wu Wei. You're losing the excess anxiety that would have gone into being very attached. That's how we know what Wu Wei really means. So let's move on. The lack of attachment results in minimal yet effective action. And when I say minimal, I just mean nothing overboard, nothing that is excessive. Just right, not too much, not too little. So let's take a look at the second one. This also has a callback to a previous chapter, and that's what I want to point out. It derives also from a concept expressed in the same chapter that we just looked at, and that's Tao of Life 48. So a little further down from the previous snippet, we see these three lines. Take the world by constantly applying non-interference. The one who interferes is not qualified to take the world. So here, interference is made distinct from management. The Tao manages, the Tao coordinates, but the Tao does not interfere. There's no overzealous type of meddling happening. Things are allowed to progress in their natural way. So when sages and Tao cultivators apply this idea to everyday life, that is also what they do. They want to go in accordance to natural inclinations, what people were supposed to be doing anyway, and then guide in that fashion. Rather than to go up against what people want to do, that's just a clash of opposing forces. So the additional context clarifies that meddling is contrary to the Tao. Non-attachments flow naturally to non-interference. So the first line that you see there, that's non-attachment. It flows naturally to the second line, which is about non-interference. And remember, that is not the same as to say that you refrain from managing anything. You still have to be doing your job in managing and coordinating. You're just not interfering in excess. Okay, so what about the last one? Is there a callback to a previous chapter? There is, but it's in a different chapter. This one comes from Tao of Life 35. It talks about the lack of taste. And this makes it clear what it's actually talking about. The Tao that is spoken out of the mouth is bland and without flavor. So the Tao is flavorless. It is invisible. It is silent. It's soundless, shapeless, formless, and now also without flavor. So what this means, this makes it clear that the taste is actually not about food, but about the Tao. So there's a basis in us explaining and interpreting the Tao of Life the way that we have. This follows the previous two lines in applying the Tao to life. Therefore, non-attachment, meaning not being overly attached to things, flowing naturally to non-interference, and of course, that means no excessive meddling on other people, other people's business, to this one, non-stimulation, that is, the lack of being overly stimulated with material world pursuits. So now you can see the flow. Now you can see why the three things are together. In studying the Tao, oftentimes the first line here, Wu Wei, gets the most attention. When people study into it at the intermediate level, they also get the non-interference. But it really does take a lot more than that to also include the last one, the bland, the without flavor. But what that means though is that the joy in the Tao is simply not the kind of exciting, stimulating things that are often associated with the material world. It is oftentimes plain and yet has a goodness that cannot be replaced. We are discussing the first 3 lines of the Tao Te Ching, chapter 63. Act without action, manage without meddling, taste without tasting. So the correct interpretation of these 3 lines is absolutely essential. And I thought of a way to make it easy to see, easy to understand. And that is, I can present them together with explanations in a tabular format, as you can see here. So what I've done, as you can see, is that for each of the 3 rows, the 3 characters from lines 1, 2, and 3 are split apart into the first part and then the second part. These all pertain to the Tao. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one, the Tao. Act without acting, act without action. How would that apply to the Tao itself? So first of all, we say that the Tao is the ultimate reality, the ultimate motivating force behind everything, something that exists behind the scenes on everything that we observe, everything that is around us. Therefore, whatever that is, the Tao accomplishes everything. That is, the changing of seasons, planetary motions, the orbits around the sun, etc. All of that is attributed to whatever the ultimate moving force is that is working behind the scenes. So the Tao accomplishes everything. And yet, at the same time, it is also true that the Tao doesn't try to do anything. It is not human. It is not human-like. It is not a deity. And therefore, it doesn't have the same kind of desires that human beings would have to do a particular thing. The Tao simply does what it does. It just happens. So that's how we can apply act without action to the Tao. The Tao isn't doing it for some kind of selfish motive, some kind of self-centric, egocentric motivation, because again, it is neither human nor human-like. It's not like a deity at all. Second part, manage without meddling. Let's take a look at how that would apply to the Tao concept. So because the Tao is whatever that is, the ultimate reality behind reality, it is what manages and coordinates everything. So I talked about the changing of seasons in the previous row. Well, the Tao coordinates the timing of that, so the leaves turn color when they're supposed to. The snow falls when it is supposed to. Everything is sort of in a universal choreography. Things happen at the right time. Now you can already tell that if we were to apply this concept to life, to your life or mine, we can then say that, I don't know exactly how it is, but things seem to happen at the right time. People come into our lives at just the right time. Maybe going from job to job, an offer comes in just at the right time to enable the next stage in your career. So that will be a personal reflection of the Tao level. let's stick to the Tao level for the time being. We're talking about the Tao managing and coordinating everything, but then without meddling. So let's bring in the other part. The Tao does not interfere with anything or anyone. The Tao is that which is natural, and therefore, when everything is progressing in accordance with the Tao, that's just another way to say everything is progressing naturally, in accordance with everything's nature. And looking at this table right here, even though we haven't filled in the last row yet, we can already tell that these can all apply to human life. And then the last row, taste. The Tao is the subtle joy and lasting zest for life. So when you cultivate the Tao for some time, you begin to get a sense for what it's all about. It's kind of hard to describe, but there's a definite joy in the Tao that is completely unlike the happiness that we experience when we buy shiny new objects. You know, when we go to an amusement park and take the thrilling rides, when we watch a movie, etc. Those are good, but they come and go. They're transient. The joy that I'm talking about associated with the Tao is a low-level joy, sense of joy that's always in the background. It is there, you can feel it, it makes you smile, sometimes for no reason, but it's definitely present. It gives you zest for life. That is, it makes you feel like there is meaning and purpose to my life. It is worth living. I am enjoying myself. So that's the kind of taste I'm talking about associated with the Tao. And yet, it's hard to put into words. So when you describe it for other people, they may not get it. Because the Tao that's coming out of your mouth, when you describe it to someone else, it seems unexciting, unremarkable, plain, and bland. Now, when you're getting deeper into the Tao, you know it is definitely nothing like that. It's not plain, it's not bland. There's a lot of beauty associated with it. There's a lasting happiness, that joy that's ever present. Not at all bland. And yet, when we describe it to other people, that is the perception for someone who doesn't yet know what the Tao is. Okay, so having seen how the Tao relates to all three lines, I think what we want to do now is to associate life. You know, we have to apply the Tao in a practical sense to everyday life. So we want to talk about the Tao of life. So let's start with the first one. The first row, you as a microcosmic copy of the Tao, when you take actions, you want to do it in a way that's similar to the Tao. You want your actions to be congruent with the Tao. You want it to be positive. You want it to benefit everybody, yourself included. You want it to be mindful and perceptive. So those would be the appropriate mindful actions that are Tao-centric. But then you want to do it without attachment, without attaching to personal agendas. It's not for your selfish motives. You're doing something not because it brings you profits, but because it is the right thing to do. Sometimes the right thing to do can be contrary to your personal interest. It may actually result in a loss. For you, though, that's okay because it's the right thing to do. So what about the second row? The manage without the meddling. whether you are a manager or supervisor or not, there are always things that you have to manage in life. Just by virtue of living, you've got quite a few things that you must manage. That is, you have to know what is out there in your tasks that have to be done. Knowing what has to be done is about the managing and coordination of your own activities. Now, you want to do that without meddling, and this one we can understand from a human perspective, if only because we frequently see people who are meddlesome, who like to get into other people's business without being invited to do so. We don't want to follow that example. We don't want to micromanage or go overboard with backseat driving. That will only bring resentment. It does not bring good results. Now, let's also tackle the last one. The last one is the trickiest of all. I see many people studying the Tao who are okay with the first two rows, but then have a difficult time with the third item here, the taste. So remember, it's not about food or drinks. It's getting a taste of the situation, getting the flavor of life. When it's Tao-centric, the flavor of life is wonderful, but it's very subtle. So the without tasting part, similar to without action, without meddling. Now you have seen that the rightmost column in this case, it's describing situations where people go overboard and doing too much. So excess is the idea. So there's no need for strong flavors of the material world because they are transients. They come and go. Let me explain. This one requires more explanation. What do I mean by strong flavors of the material world? Am I talking about spicy food or spicy adventures? Am I talking about that? Typically, when we talk about the strong flavors of the material world, it is referring to the seeking of fame and fortune. It's the chasing of the various physical thrills. So there's no need for that because one can get all the joy that one needs in a very lasting way from the Tao itself, from your connection with kindred spirits, from the friendship that you forge with other people. There's a sublime and lasting joy in just that, in human connection. So what this lower right-hand corner is talking about, it is to appreciate the simple things, enjoy the subtle flavors of the simple things, which can be greater than any of the stimulations. So let me give you an example. Think about the material world as soda pop. Maybe Coca-Cola, Pepsi, some kind of soda pop. What is it? Well, it's basically sugar plus artificial flavors that sometimes can leave an aftertaste. So that's the material world. What is the Tao in that comparison? The Tao is pure water. With water, unlike soda, no artificial flavors, no sugar. It's simple, it's plain, bland, unremarkable, and yet it is also the essence of thirst-quenching goodness. That's what we're talking about here. Something that is so common, we don't pay attention to it. And yet, when you're thirsty, nothing does a better job. When you're hot and sweaty, nothing does it better to cool you down, to hydrate you so you can be healthy, recover, and be energetic. So you can tell now between the last slide and this one, we've talked about the Tao level. Here, we're talking about the personal level, the level of all our lives. And let me also talk about, at the personal level, what would be the reverse of these Tao ideals that we see here. So for instance, the opposite, the reverse of Wu Wei, not just excessive actions, but also manifestations of being shrewd, overly clever, trying to do things, extra things that you're not really supposed to, that don't really bring you benefits, but excessive shrewdness. And what about the opposite of the without meddling? Well, we've seen that in the busybodies in our lives, people that just can't stay away from other people's business, but it isn't just that. There's more. To be the opposite of 无事, 有事, not just meddling, not just interfering, but also claiming credit. Like, look at what I have done. Whereas the people who understand the principle that we're looking at here, when they're done with something, they're able to just let it go. It's done. I don't need to shine a spotlight on it. I've done what I wanted to do. The people who don't understand will be the ones who say, hey, everybody, look at what I have done. And lastly, the opposite of just enjoying the subtle flavors of life would be a taste of ego-inflating fame. That's a very strong taste. It's a taste that many people have become addicted to. So it isn't just having developed a taste for fame, it's actually having developed an addiction to fame. Those will be the opposite of the Tao of Life that we're talking about here. So let's get back to the lines of the Tao Te Ching for further explorations. So we're done with the first three lines. That was a very comprehensive discussion of that. Now let's talk about line 4 and line 5. Starting with line 4. Line 4 says great, small, many, few. So I want to break that down. 大小多少. 4 characters. The translation is a literal translation of those 4 characters. The 4 characters mean big, small, many, few. And of course, big can also be great or vast, grand, etc. And that's how you can get that particular translation. It's pretty much verbatim. So what does it mean? Well, when Lao Tzu says great, small, many, few, he's referring to the things in your world, things you have to manage, your tasks, your duties, your connections, relationships. And it could be big things, little things, numerous, or just a few. And the way that where he's going, Lao Tzu means for this to be taken in conjunction with the next line. And what it says is that no matter what it is that you do in life, whether you're handling big things, little things, whether you work with many of the few, the Tao is always the same. The Tao is constant, no matter what you're doing. And the point he wants to make is line 5. As you can see, line 5 says, respond to hatred with virtue. Now that is also a pretty literal translation, where the first character there is to respond, and then the second character hatred, complaints, and then with, and then the last character, de, that's the character for virtue. So kind of a straightforward translation. Let's talk about the meaning. This concept is central to the Tao. It shows up in the Tao practice, in Tao teachings, all over the place. Now, in life, here's what I want to point out that I think you're going to recognize as being true to your experience. It is certainly true in my experience, just looking at people, just observing the world and see how people are. In life, most people tend to respond in kind. That's not a controversial statement there. That's what we see. Most people, if you're good to them, they're good to you. If you are awful to them, they are awful in return. Most people tend to respond in kind, whether it's positive or negative. That's what we see most often, but it is not the Tao. In the Tao, one has to respond not necessarily in kind, but respond to the negative with the positive. And certainly, we respond to the positive with the positive as well. Indeed, we respond to the neutral with the positive. Bottom line, no matter what it is that we come across, there is a duty among Tao cultivators that you want to frame the best possible response, one that benefits all, one that preserves harmony, and therefore the response will always have to be skillful and positive in some way. Something that is a win-win, something that benefits all involved. Let's get to that. Let's talk about that in greater detail. What most people do responding in kind, our expression for that typically is like an eye for an eye. You poke out my eye, I'm going to poke out your eye. So an eye for an eye is not in accordance with the Tao. As has already been remarked by many people, wise people, if you strictly follow an eye for an eye, pretty soon the whole world is blind. So vengeance only perpetuates more vengeance. It is not a solution to vengeance. So vengeance is a perpetuation, not a solution. It brings you more of the same. It puts a stop to nothing. It continues it. So therefore, in the Tao, one must respond to the negative with the positive. This is something that I reiterate quite a few times. So along with the previous line, this is talking about consistency, that the Tao is consistent, applied at any level, at the cosmic level, and also at the personal level. So let's be real about life. Your life, my life, everyone's life. Everybody encounters negativity at some point in life. And therefore, everybody has the opportunity to figure out a better response to that. So big, small, many, few, regardless of scale, how you react is of the utmost importance. That's what we're trying to say here, okay? So Tao cultivators practice virtues consistently, not conditionally. So to illustrate this concept, I would like to share a story with everyone. The name of the story is Watering the Melons. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, in ancient China, during the warring stage period, there were two kingdoms next to each other. And I have those two kingdoms listed in the slide. As you can see, there is Liang Guo, the kingdom of Liang, to the left. And then to the right, there's Chu Guo, the kingdom of Chu. Along the border of the two kingdoms, because they were adjacent to each other, there were farms growing melons, and there were soldiers stationed along the border on both sides for the two kingdoms. Now, the soldiers worked on these farmlands when they are not practicing military actions. They are farming with the melons, watering the fields. So the ones on the Liang side to the left, those soldiers were diligent in watering their fields. So their melons grew quite well. Their counterparts on the Chu side, the right side, were lazy and rarely watered their fields. So their melons did not grow well at all. After a while, the difference between the two sides became apparent. It was too great for anyone to ignore. On the one side, you've got these large, beautiful melons, and then on the other side, you've got withering melons. So the regional governor on the Chu side, the right side, was not happy about this. It was a loss of face to him, because anyone could take a look at the two sides and see that his side looked a lot worse. So the regional governor blamed it on the incompetence of the soldiers on his side. He ordered them to sneak across the border at night to uproot as many melons as they could. It was sort of like, they dare to show us up with their better looking melons. Well, I will teach them. You men go over to their side in the middle of the night and you destroy those melons. Later on, when the soldiers on the Liang side, the left side, saw the destruction, they were mad as hell. They had worked so hard to grow these melons. Now that effort had been ruined. Immediately, they planned to retaliate. They reported it to their commander. They planned to sneak across the border at night and destroy the melons on the Chu side. Fighting fire with fire, an eye for an eye. It's time for payback. So the commander reported this to the regional governor on the Liang side, the left side, who immediately disapproved. He said to the commander, no, if we retaliate, troubles will start and never end. We cannot stoop down to their level. Why should we act in that dishonorable way just because they did it first? That makes no sense at all. Then he ordered the commander, he said, here's what we must do instead. You and the men will cross the border at night, but not to destroy their melons. Instead, I want you and your men to water them and care for them as if they were your own. Do this, but don't tell anyone. So the soldiers of Liang did not understand the order, but they obeyed the order exactly. They were in the military, after all. And after a while, the soldiers on the Chu side noticed it. See, they knew they hadn't worked on their farms at all, and yet the melons were thriving. They were frequently watered. They were growing really well. What was going on? They wanted to know. So they hid themselves at night to see who would come by to water their melons. And they discovered Liang soldiers showing up in the middle of the night to do the work that they themselves had neglected. Now the Chu regional governor heard about this. You know, hey, the melons on our side, they're growing really well. He thought that it was a good thing. Like, you know, we didn't have to do any work. And yet they're growing, they're being watered on a regular basis. That's great. So he reported it to his king, the king of Chu Guo, the Chu kingdom. The king immediately understood what was going on. He realized the Liang side, the other kingdom, was sending a message. And it was a message of peace. Like, hey, we don't want to be enemies. He ordered an investigation into the matter. He wanted to know if his soldiers along the border had done anything else to the Liang side. He then prepared lavish presents and sent them to the king of Liang as a way to apologize. This gesture won him the respect of his counterpart, the other ruler. And that king felt that this king was a man of honor, worthy of trust. Thereafter, diplomatic relations between the two kingdoms began and flourished, and this led to an enduring friendship and alliance between the two that benefited both kingdoms tremendously. So it was a happy ending, but it all began when a wise governor understood that revenge was not the way. He and his soldiers followed the Tao and framed a response to sabotage that was not retribution, but a demonstration of their virtue. The end. So that is the story of watering the melon. Now, as usual, I would like to talk about the meaning of it. I have a slide here about how to apply the story to life. What is it talking about? Well, first of all, let's talk about the different elements in the story. The soldiers of Chu Guo, the kingdom of Chu, represent those in your life who have acted against you. Now, we see this all the time. There are naysayers, backstabbers, ankle biters, the whole lot. Quite a few people like that. So this is quite common. And the common response, the typical response, is to strike back and get even. Haven't we all seen that? Haven't we all done that ourselves from time to time? Gotta get back. Gotta get even. But then the typical outcome is continuing constant contention and conflict. Exactly the point that was made in the story. So what is the better way? The Tao responds to water the melons. How would that map to real life? It means that you must demonstrate awareness. Oh yeah, I know what's going on. I know what you're doing, okay? I know exactly what you're doing. But then you also want to demonstrate kindness. I'm gonna let it go. But I am aware. And the Tao outcome, diplomatic relations in the story, that translates to you winning people over as friends and allies. Of course, we know from experience that such things may be easy for the sage, but not easy for everyday people like you and me. And I must further note, if you pay attention to the elements in the story, it was very deliberate that the soldiers of Liang Guo, the side that was diligent, they had the ability to retaliate, but they chose not to. They were ordered by their authority to not do that. They were ordered to respond with kindness, but they did so from a position of strength. So I don't want this story to get twisted when you apply it to life. This is not a story about a victim of abuse, of bullying, who just takes more, and call that showing kindness or showing virtue. No, because the power levels in those situations are not the same as represented in the story. It would not be the Tao for victims to just take more abuse or more bullying. The Tao is that if that is a situation in your life, you must get to a position of strength. You must put some distance between you and the toxic elements in your life so that when you eventually respond with kindness and virtue, you will be doing so with power. Okay, so I want to make sure that we fully understand what the story is really about, what it's really telling us. I'm very happy that we had a chance to tell that story because I see that we are limited in the amount of time and we have to go to our summary for today. Our summary is going to be very simple. It's about those 3 principles that you saw and applying them to life. So the first 3 lines, we will restate them in a slightly different way. 无为, that's the first one. The unattached action. Remember, it's not non-action. It's not doing nothing. Those are mistaken, erroneous interpretations. 无为 is Tao-centric action without attachments, and it can be seamless. It can oftentimes be imperceptible to most people, and yet it is very effective. It is a focus on the process because life is about the journey and not the destination. Your tasks are about the process and not the end result. So there's more. The second one, non-interference. 无视. Mind your own business rather than somebody else's. And that's pretty simple. It's just that sometimes it is so difficult for us to resist the temptation of getting involved in somebody else's business, even though we have not been invited to interfere. Lastly, and the last one is the difficult one to understand. And that is why I want to put a little bit of extra emphasis on it. Appreciate the goodness. The best things in life, the subtle flavors of life can be right in front of you. It's just that you have to notice, you have to pay attention to it. You have to understand, see it with the eyes of the Tao to cultivate that receptive perception that leads to appreciation. What do I mean by that? There are everyday examples. Something as simple as your ability to breathe in deeply. Everyone has the ability to do that. Think about the goodness in that simple breath. To inhale deeply and then to exhale slowly. Your body relaxes in the process. You feel great. There's goodness in that. It's something that is so unremarkable, so common, like taking a drink of pure water. Those are the elements of the simple life, the small yet awesome things in life that if you were to open your mind in a receptive way, you start to see all of them. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.